My name's Mark. I work for Montreal International. We're the economic development agency for Greater Montreal. Essentially, my job is to help companies come set up in Montreal. I work very closely with my good friends at the Canadian Consulate down here in the front left portion. So if you guys are ever interested in anywhere in Canada, Montreal especially, go talk to my friends here. They could definitely set you up. They're great people. So when I was speaking to Jérôme and David, a little bit about a presentation. I want to talk about what the most exciting stuff going on in Montreal is. Right now, artificial intelligence it's almost become a buzzword across the world, right? Like this is something, it almost has no meaning anymore, but in Montreal it does. There's so much going on in Montreal. We've had announcements almost on a weekly basis, and we've just had so much excitement that it's almost all I talk about. My territory, my role is to promote Montreal generally. All I've done for the past 2 years is AI projects and work with AI. So what's better than me talking about it is me showing a video to you guys. So my first slide is actually a video of what's going on in Montreal. We put this together last year with a number of the researchers. I think it gives you a good view of what's happening in Montreal and the excitement. And then I'll take it from there.
Generations of innovators and thinkers have built Montreal into the city it is today. A city where new ideas are welcomed, where talent thrives, and creativity flourishes.
So the thing that makes Montreal special is the critical mass. It's the number of researchers in this area, especially in deep learning. Right? So deep learning and to some extent reinforcement learning, we have here a higher concentration of researchers than anywhere in the world.
We believe it's the next Silicon Valley, really, between the startup activity that has really picked up in machine learning and AI, the large research labs that have now set up shop here, and the universities. All the ingredients are there, and I think the excitement is also there.
The reason we're establishing ourselves in Montreal is because of the ecosystem here, and we hope to contribute to the snowball effect that has been starting in Montreal for a while.
So I think that our unique commitment of everyone involved here to really build something big, something new in Montreal, a new Silicon Valley that is different, that is Montreal's Silicon Valley. We have all the ingredients, and we just need people to engage in that mission, in that adventure, and I think we'll do great things.
It's one of the best places where you can see industry collaborating with academia, collaborating with the government, for example, all towards a single vision of advancing artificial intelligence.
We want to work with the scientific community and grow with them. And I think that's the main characteristic of the Montreal ecosystem here. It's collaboration.
The cost of developing an innovation is lower in Montreal. The quality of life is excellent. On top of that, there's this critical mass of talent in Montreal that you don't find elsewhere.
So Montreal is the AI city. It's also a city where we care not just about the science of AI, but to become responsible leaders in AI. I think this is something that's important for researchers. They want to see their work used for good. This is something they see more and more in the scientific community, and this is something that's really one of the core characteristics of the community we have here in Montreal.
Do you know any other place where you have Microsoft Research, Facebook AI, Google Brain, soon to be DeepMind,
Startups across the board,
Mila,
yeah.
startups, McGill, there's only Montreal.
So I think that gives a good view of what's going on in Montreal. And for anyone in machine learning, in reinforcement learning, deep learning, Professor Benjo, if you're not familiar with him, he is one of the godfathers of the research movement. I'll talk to him a little bit more in the next slide. But so what I wanted to present is essentially how the ecosystem got built in Montreal and what has made it world class. So as I mentioned, there's the profs in Montreal, which is really where it all stems from. There's three main professors, and you could probably expand a little bit outside of that. But there's Professor Benjo. His story is about 8 years ago, there was a breakthrough in deep learning. Deep learning is a subset of artificial intelligence. And deep learning is essentially a way to make decisions. I'm not an AI researcher, so if any of you are AI researchers, correct me if I'm way off base. But it's a way to make decisions, a way to use data to make decisions. He had this breakthrough about 8 years ago with two other professors, Jeffrey Hinton and Yann LeCun. What happened was Yann LeCun went to Facebook to run their AI team. You saw him in the video. And Jeffrey Hinton went to Google to be a major part of their AI team. Why we're extremely fortunate in Montreal is that Professor Benjo stayed in Montreal. He stayed in academia. He's an academic at heart. He's a Montrealer for most of his life. And he's always worked at the University of Montreal. So because of that, we have this big pool of talent coming from essentially one of the, and he's been, it's not me that says it, the godfathers of AI. He has made breakthroughs in this field. One of the most notable breakthroughs is from one of his students called Ian Goodfellow that came up with a breakthrough in generative adversarial networks. And that was done in a bar in Montreal one night. And it just shows how much Montreal has. Outside of Professor Benjo, there's also another school, McGill University, where there's Joël Pruneau and Dwayne Apricot. They're involved in reinforcement learning. That's how you train the data to make your decisions. They are also world-class. What happens now is Joël runs the Facebook team in Montreal, and Dwayne runs the DeepMind team in Montreal. And when you have these two pools of talent, the deep learning as well as the reinforcement learning, they're both world-class. And when you have them both in one city, it's really what has made us stand out in the field. Outside of that, then there's the government support. The government support's really, really important, right? So this goes to show that the government is backing this from start to finish. About 3 years ago, a little bit under 3 years ago, the government gave $93.5 million in what was called the, I know the term in French, but now we're calling the Canada First Research Excellence Fund to support AI in Montreal. From there, it's just been nonstop. There has been provincial support. There's been support across Canada. Really what Canada has a pan-Canadian AI strategy between Montreal, Toronto, and Edmonton, which all have their own researchers and focuses. And then outside of that, what's really, really exciting for Montreal is that there's an initiative across Canada called the superclusters, where there's different areas of the country that were chosen to lead very focused research. What happened was Montreal got given the AI mandate for Scale.ai, a supply chain-based AI research organization. Right there's close to $1 billion in investment between private and public funding. So that shows the governmental support behind what's happening in Montreal. Another really, really exciting aspect of Montreal is this new AI district being formed. Mila, who is the organization of Professor Benjo that I mentioned earlier, has a couple buildings in Montreal supported by the government where they're bringing all the smartest researchers in all of the world are all going to work out of these more or less 3 buildings. Microsoft, Google, Facebook, Samsung, RBC all have offices in these buildings. They're building it as a hub of AI. So the way they're presenting it is that it's not where you go set up your whole team. Set up your research team there, and they're going to have these what they're calling collisions, right? You'll be able to meet Professor Benjo, his students, researchers from Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon, almost any company you could think of will all be in this 3-block radius. It's going to be so exciting to work there, and my job is going to be a lot easier. I'll bring people to one stop rather than traveling all the city to show everything going on in AI. Outside of that, there's the students in Montreal. We have we are one of the biggest students populations in North America. We have 11 higher education institutions in Montreal, outside of what I already mentioned of Montreal University and McGill University. We were rated the #1 city for foreign students in the world last year. The results just came out last week. We dropped to #4 this year, but still pretty good. And this is a picture of Professor Benjo's lab. I think this is from 3 years ago, so I think it's quadrupled in size since then. And we also have initiatives in Montreal to attract and retain students in Montreal. We understand how important that talent pool is for these researchers. And these are all master's level and PhD students that are working under Professor Benjo, again, one of the foremost researchers in the world. Outside of that, and what we're telling a lot of companies now, maybe 3 years ago, what we would have said is that Montreal is a place where you could come and acquire talent, go in, hire talent. What the narrative in the past was that there was a lot of this brain drain. People would leave Montreal, go to the Valley, come out here potentially, go to Seattle, instead of staying in Montreal. What's happening now is that all these companies have come to Montreal. Like I mentioned earlier, pretty much any big name you know. But what has made that exciting is that Montreal has now become a talent magnet for artificial intelligence. So just 2 examples, and these are recent examples, are Hugo Larochelle and Jeff Gordon. So Hugo Larochelle, his story was that he had a startup in Montreal, again through Professor Benjo's lab, sold it to Twitter, went and worked in Twitter Cortex in Boston. About 2 years ago, and again a little bit more than 2 years ago, he wanted to come back to Montreal. Essentially, Google built a Google Brain Lab around him in Montreal because they wanted to have him and they wanted to have a presence in Montreal. So because of him, he's got an international team, people from France, England, essentially all over the world have come to Montreal to work through his lab and be closely associated to all the research done in Montreal. Outside Hugo, there's Jeff Gordon. Jeff Gordon was at CMU, Carnegie Mellon. He is coming to run the Microsoft lab in Montreal. The Microsoft story is a really, really interesting story as well. They had a startup called Maluba that got bought by Microsoft just under 2 years ago now. And since then, they've doubled down on Montreal. They keep growing in Montreal. They're probably the most active big company in Montreal right now. And Jeff Gordon, who's a world-renowned researcher again from Carnegie Mellon, is coming to Montreal. He's moving in 2 weeks, if I'm not mistaken, to run the McGill lab. So it just goes to show that not only do we have the young talent, this core talent in Montreal, but now because of all the excitement, we're starting to draw world-class talent into Montreal. And then this is kind of what opens the doors, what gets everybody excited, right? All the big names have announced in Montreal. And you can see the narrative there, but it essentially started with Hugo's team. A couple years ago, Google announced a team in Montreal. And before that, there was a lot going on in Montreal, but it was less the public-facing stuff. Professor Benjo and Duena and Joel all had funding, all had support from major institutions, but the talent was still leaving, and there was the competition wasn't as fierce. But now everyone's coming to Montreal. So there's the Google lab that announced. Then there was IBM. Then there was Microsoft. Then there was DeepMind. Then there was Facebook. Then there was Samsung. Then there was Thales. Thales, if you're not familiar with them, that's one of them, for my job, one of the most interesting ones because they do applied artificial intelligence research. So they're doing the research within this community, but then they're applying it. So they're a much bigger team, and where they're hiring, honestly, a lot more people than a lot of these research labs, which are on the smaller side, 50 to 100 people. And then what may be, in my opinion, the most exciting thing going on in Montreal is what's happening in the startup and the early stage ecosystem. We have a number of accelerators and incubators in Montreal that are either focused on AI or have an AI angle, I could say. A few of them that I put up here, one of them people in Denver and Boulder are probably very, very familiar with. But the little flame there is Founder Fuel. Founder Fuel is probably the best accelerator across Canada. It's definitely the oldest, if I'm not mistaken. They run two cohorts a year, very focused on AI technologies, but more applied AI, not the deep tech. McGill University has a business accelerator. They were just ranked 8th best in the world for their business acceleration. Again, one of the premier universities around the world, doing some really, really incredible stuff. Tandem launches might be my favorite to bring people to. They take hard tech out of school. They more or less canvass and research all universities around the world, find technology coming through the school and build companies around those technologies. It's not necessarily even the researchers that developed those technologies. It's stuff that's open source, that's out there. But they'll find an application, present it to their industry partners, and see if something works. Some stuff they have in there, they have a cloud robotics platform. You walk into this room, and you have robots going around you, trying to understand what you're doing. They have another one doing computer vision for cars. They just got a big investment last week from GM Innovation. They have some really, really cool deep tech stuff with a lot of hard tech there to see. I'll save Techstars for last. There's CDL, Creative Destruction Lab. Creative Destruction Lab is a really interesting model. They don't take any equity like a lot of these accelerators, but you go in and you work with the MBA students at the Université de Montréal and a network of mentors. One of the mentors there is the former CFO of Google. It just goes to show you the quality of mentors in this. And they run it a little bit like a, how can you say it? Like a survivor contest. They start with about 30 or 40 teams at the beginning. I think they just finished up their first cohort. There were 9 teams that graduated. So they really go hard and they really cut down. So you have 9 world-class teams that come out of this program. And then there's Techstars, which a lot of you are, I assume, very familiar with. They chose Montreal for their AI program, which for me, validates again a lot what's going on in Montreal. When Techstars, which is arguably the best accelerator in the world, chooses Montreal to set up their AI-focused accelerator, it really means a lot. I was with the director in Montreal last week, and he's got, I think, 500 or 600 applications from around the world. It's going to be an incredible, incredible event. They're running their demo day in December. When you talk startups in Montreal, there's one you can't leave out, and they're almost shouldn't be considered a startup anymore. That's Element AI. They raised $102 million US in a Series A. Just under a year ago, they announced it. They are probably the best startup in the world. You see Professor Benjo, he's associated with this company. He's in that picture. And they're doing right now a lot of deep research. They have offices in Montreal, I think I have it up there. Yeah, Singapore, London, Toronto, and Seoul. Incredible team. They're growing at an unbelievable pace. A couple hundred people already in Montreal. If you ever come to Montreal, I'd be happy to introduce you to them. A lot of my very, very good friends work there. And they've raised the most capital of any AI company in the world. I think they just got beat last week or 2 weeks ago by an Asian company. But they're doing some incredible research in their lab. A number of other startups going on in Montreal. I won't run through all of these, but if ever you come to Montreal or if ever you're interested, there's some incredible applications, a lot of applied AI, right? There's the deep research that is really exciting, what all of the labs are doing right now, but what has come and grown out of this now is these startups that are really using applied AI and what they're doing. There's a company in Montreal called Imagia that's solving cancer. They just announced a partnership with Olympus last week. There's Algolux that I mentioned who does computer vision for cars, that is a partnership with General Motors. There is Wrench up there who has augmented reality and AI where you walk into their office and they have cameras trained on you and can pick up all your movements and change your character in real time. It is unbelievable the excitement going on in Montreal, and I think that's really what shows where we could play the leading edge role, where the next world leaders are being developed. And then the upcoming events in Montreal. If you want to come to Montreal, any one of these events would be a good chance for you to come to Montreal, to understand what's going on. They all have a different focus, right? So next week, if anyone has last-minute travel plans or some plane tickets booked, there's the AI Forum in Montreal. You'll see me do more or less this exact same speech on Wednesday morning if you want to come. But it's a very business-oriented conference. It's during C2 Montreal, 3 incredible days. It's outside. It's beautiful weather. But they have researchers, again, from McGill. They have Professor Benjo speaking. They have researchers from a number of not-for-profits talk about how they're using AI to solve world problems. It is a really, really well-done conference. It's more or less our big conference of Montreal. It's, how can you put it? It's a little bit like a Web Summit, if you're familiar with that. Just a big, really blowout conference with a couple thousand people attend. AI Fest is this summer. That's during Startup Fest. So if you're more on the startup side, and that what excites you, is during Startup Fest. It's a week-long startup event. I was at Boulder Startup Week yesterday. It's a little bit along the same lines of that, except it's centralized, a little bit of South by Southwest kind of event. Very early stage startups, which is a really good chance to get a taste there. There's the Montreal AI Symposium in August. This is a research-focused conference, a one-day conference focused on research that's being done in Montreal. Again, extremely well-done conference, chaired by Hugo Larochelle, who I mentioned earlier. And then there's the conference, the NIPS conference, Neural Informational Processing Systems Conference. This is the research conference for all AI researchers around the world. I was at it last year in Long Beach, about 10,000 researchers. I, again, am not a researcher. I walked into one room, I understood 3 words of the panel, and then the rest was deep, deep technical talk. But it is going to have 10,000 people talking AI in Montreal. There'll be a number of events. The conference itself, if you're not a researcher, might not be that valuable, but to see what's going on, there'll be a number of side conferences and events. That's going on in the first week of December. So if you come to Montreal for that, it's going to be a really, really big deal. Outside of that, there's my face, there's my name. If you ever come to Montreal, reach out, connect with me. I'm happy to show you around. My job is to show you around, so it's not only that I like doing it, I'm paid to do it. I'm happy to help in any way possible. If you're curious, you could email me, find me on LinkedIn, send me a message, however you can get a hold of me. I usually check all means. And I guess I have about a minute for questions if anyone has questions or if there's any other questions.
Probably have time for one question, unfortunately, because we started a little bit late. But if anybody has a burning question, I'm happy to
You can catch up to me outside. I'll be around till about during the cocktail tonight, so if anyone wants to chat. Oh. We do have one.
Are you seeing more going on with Amazon in Canada?
We're seeing a lot going on with Amazon in Canada. So like everywhere in the world, there was the HQ2 bid, and this is a little bit tangential to this. I was one of the leaders on the HQ2 bid for Montreal. We were extremely disappointed that we didn't make the shortlist, but regardless of that, our goal, and I think all of Canada's goal, was to work closer with Amazon and have closer ties with Amazon. Vancouver just announced a big development with Amazon. We're in talks with them there. I was mentioning someone, Amazon is in town tomorrow in Montreal. We're in talks with them almost on a weekly basis, so we see a lot of activity with Amazon these days.
Yeah, we have a number of customers that are doing a lot of e-commerce with Amazon and who are actually shipping to Canada for their fulfillment there. But what they're running into is trying to cost the GST and the duties and taxes into so this way the customer doesn't have to pay for it. I mean, they pay for it, but they can roll it in, and it's been a little bit challenging.
Yeah, well, hopefully Amazon has a much bigger presence soon. If I do my job right, hopefully there'll be a couple announcements in the next little bit for the Montreal area. But yeah, I think across Canada there's been a lot more activity.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. That concludes
Thank you,
this
everyone.
session.